Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Chipmunk here. It's been an interesting week preparing this video, and I will tell you why real briefly. For these videos, I look up and do my research, like proper research, you know. And the website I was taking all this information from seemed like a really good website. They'd really done their research. So in doing research on said site for this video, I went ahead and looked up the movies from the previous decade just to see what I was in for. And one of them was listed as the film How to Be a Detective. And how did I, a total film geek, never at least hear of this film? That seemed highly suspect. Haha, detective suspects, haha. Also with the title, it just, unless you've got Bob Hope starring, that just doesn't sound like a, big movie title. So I looked it up, and How to Be a Detective was a short film starring Robert Benchley. There is no way that would have been the top movie. And that made me realize that all the information I was giving was incorrect. I'm really sorry about that. I put everything on hold, even the movies I had requested from the library and etc. Went through and redid my list, and now you should have the correct information. I hope. I'm really trying here, I promise. This information has been verified by Wikipedia, which is generally decently accurate. At least we're going to go with it, and if it's not accurate, you know who to blame. So, without further ado, here we get into the decade, starting with 1940, Pinocchio. Directed by Ben Sharpstein and Hamilton Lusk. These guys were supervising directors. There were more gents as sequence directors. Starring Cliff Edwards and Dickie Jones. 1 hour and 28 minutes. The classic animated feature about a woodcarver who wishes he had a son. Heaven intervenes in the form of the Blue Fairy, gifting his carved puppet with life. The puppet, however, can only become a flesh and blood real boy once he learns the difference between right and wrong and how to walk the moral path. Now, I only watched this for the first time last year and just rewatched it to refresh my memory. The early animation is absolutely exquisite. The shading, the backgrounds, those clocks. But I'm glad I didn't watch this as a child because I would have been absolutely terrified at certain parts. Pinocchio gets kidnapped, turned into a donkey, sort of, and swallowed by a whale, nearly dying, which would have been a complete deal breaker for tiny me. I couldn't watch E.T. for years, it all was just too much. This movie was actually overall rather a flop when it came out, due to the timing of the war breaking out across the Eastern Hemisphere, removing the European and Asian markets from the equation. But it still works so well as a film to this day, giving a moral lesson without being too preachy. Plus, there are technical aspects which are a real treat. When the camera moves around to show the cricket jumping or the wagon rocking, and then there's parts of the Blue Fairy that are translucent. It's all incredibly clever and, I would guess, groundbreaking. This film is a treat, although perhaps still too scary for very little children. Plus, there's the warning of tobacco depictions, which I, being an 80s kid, find rather humorous. You all should have been in the non-quote-unquote smoking section of a restaurant. Nah, on second thought, it's good that you weren't. Watch this movie instead. 1941, Sergeant York. Directed by Howard Hawks. Starring Gary Cooper and Joan Leslie. 2 hours and 23 minutes. Based on the true story of a backwoods Tennessee fellow who became a World War I hero. This film didn't really hit with me the first time, so I rewatched it again for this video and liked it much better the second time through. Note that if you go in expecting a war film, the war stuff doesn't actually start until over halfway through. We meet York, who lives with his younger siblings and mama in a cabin in very rural Tennessee. He's a bit of a wastrel who spends a lot of time drinking with his buddies. This changes when he falls in love. He then works hard attempting to buy a homestead for the two of them, but this falls through. He almost falls into a depression, but is turned around by a religious breakthrough. When he gets put in the war, he is a conscientious objector at first, but then he manages to find a reason to keep going after some soul-searching, realizing, as he later explains, that he figures the only way to save lives is to stop the guns from shooting, and there is only one way to do that. The hero part comes when he and a small cadre of soldiers go after the enemy. Most are mowed down by a machine gun nest on high ground. York manages to take the nest and then also the enemy soldiers in the adjoining trench. It's a fantastic scene, and followed up by the fact that the Americans are not equipped to house so many POWs. It's just great. York is sent back to the States and feted as a hero, but he remains humble, wishing only to go back home. When he does this, he finds his community has banded together to gift him a homestead. Now, all this is very much based on York's real experience. He really was a humble hero, working for charities and for the Civilian Conservation Corps, and turning down numerous attempts to film his memoir. Finally, he agreed, only to take the money to finance an interdenominational Christian school. Cooper is good at these types of humble man roles and embodies the part quite believably in his understated way. He was 40 years old at the time of filming, whereas York was in his early 30s, and it is obvious Coop is playing a bit younger than he actually is. Here's the interesting thing. Whereas his mother, played by Margaret Wycherly, is 20 years older than he, and thusly could actually be his mother, which is refreshing when it comes to Hollywood films, his girlfriend is played by Joan Leslie. I know enough about Joan Leslie to know that she wasn't anywhere near 30 at this time, but I was unprepared. I thought she looked decently young, but then I looked it up, and I found out that she was actually 15 years old at the time this film was shot. 15. Not only is Coop old enough to play her father, but she is a literal child. Future Lassie mom, June Lockhart, is here as York's younger sister, and she is only a few months younger than Leslie. It's gross, even for Hollywood. This is a good film even to this day, well made and holds up pretty decently, but knowing what I know now makes it hard to watch. Let's move on to 1942 with Bambi. Directed by David D. Hand, plus sequence directors, starring Donnie Dunnigan and Peter Ben. 1 hour and 10 minutes. Well, the things I do for this channel. I have never seen Bambi. I always avoided it like the plague because I had heard things. I refer you to my comments on Pinocchio. It's a sweet little fluffy movie about adorable animals where nothing bad ever happens at all, ever. The end. Thank you. No need to look further into this at all. Okay, yeah, that part happens about 45 minutes in, and I can definitely report that knowing it will happen may lessen the trauma, but doesn't lessen the bawling. All it took was an inkling that all was not well in the forest, and I was all skippy squirrel in the front row of Bambi the dearest deer. If you know, you know. It's also difficult to watch the animals flee the forest fire at the end, although the fire itself is animated gorgeously. There really isn't a lot to the plot. Baby deer makes friends, grows up and falls in love, loses a loved one or two, does some heroics, then has babies of his own, and it's the circle of life. It's just a very simple coming-of-age story with no real complications, and honestly, it was kind of boring. The animation, however, is just lovely, and April Showers is still a fantastic song. I wouldn't own it, but it's worth checking out. Just keep those tissues handy. 1943, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Directed by Sam Wood. Starring Gary Cooper, again, and Ingrid Bergman. 2 hours and 50 minutes. Also based on a novel by Ernest Hemingway, here is Cooper, an American in Spain. helping the Spaniards with their fight against fascism during the Spanish Civil War. He is sent to assist a small group hiding out in the mountains, with the plan to use his demolition expertise to blow up a bridge integral to enemy movements. There is infighting among the group, but eventually the plan comes to fruition. Cooper has also fallen in love with Bergman's Maria, no last name given, a young woman whose village was raided and her parents killed. Once the bridge has been dispatched, the enemy attacks the fleeing group and Cooper is hit. He knows the others cannot escape with him, so sacrifices himself. He fires on the advancing enemy with a machine gun in a fairly neat POV shot where he is firing directly at the camera. This is the only neat part of this film, really. It's basically just too long. On top of which, some of the actors' line delivery is slow, which, instead of adding drama, comes across as making everything even longer. The bridge scene is exciting and suspenseful, but it takes too long to get there, and the ending is utterly predictable. Plus which, the color in this movie is oddly washed out. I thought maybe I'd gotten a bad copy, but when I look it up online, yeah, pretty much all the pictures and clips and everything are that color. It's very odd. Cooper and Bergman, and everyone else, the cast does have some Spanish folks, but overall it's a melting pot of different nationalities, from Russian to Moldovan. They do a fine job. Pretty much. But just, overall, I just didn't feel this one was worth all that time. 1944, Going My Way. Directed by Leo McCarey. Starring Bing Crosby and Barry Fitzgerald. 2 hours and 6 minutes. Crosby is a priest called in to help Fitzgerald's struggling parish in the big city. He does so by simultaneously assisting various parish members and starting a boys' choir. The main thing, however, comes as he writes and sells a song to a publisher with the help of his old school friend and now opera star, played by real-life opera star, Reese? It's spelled this way. Stevens. There is enough money that Crosby offers to pay for passage for Fitzgerald to go back to his home in Ireland to see his mother, but then the church catches on fire, and the money is needed to rebuild. Nonetheless, Crosby is still able to arrange the trip for Fitzgerald's mother to come to the States instead, surprising Fitzgerald in a genuinely touching scene. Crosby is then reassigned to another church, and another old friend takes his place. This is still a decently well-known film today, and I've had it on my radar for years, but just never felt the need to watch it. I am happy to report that it is just a good, sweet little movie, and one I know I would enjoy rewatching. Crosby was always better at playing the character of Crosby rather than acting per se, and the story is well suited to his particular talents, including several songs. Fitzgerald as the curmudgeonly priest with a crusty exterior and heart of gold is a delight, and it bears mentioning again that although the scene when he sees his mama could so easily be corny, instead it is rather a Niagara Falls moment. I wouldn't say this is one I go out and buy, but if I was flipping channels and it was on, I'd probably stop and spend a pleasant afternoon with this as companion. 1945, The Bells of St. Mary's. Directed by Leo McCarey. Starring Bing Crosby and Ingrid Bergman. 2 hours and 6 minutes, but like its predecessor, the length isn't noticeable. In this sequel to Going My Way, Crosby's father O'Malley is now sent to help run a Catholic school run by a convent of nuns. Is there any other kind of convent? Bergman's sister Benedict is a particularly good-hearted young nun who really wants the best for the school and for the children, and she works as an excellent partner for Crosby. The school is getting old and run down, and it doesn't have much money for repairs. It also suffers from their playground space being cut down due to a local developer building a high-rise on the neighboring lot. Now, the developer's plan is to take the school and raise it, turning it into parking for the high-rise. Sister Benedict, however, has faith that somehow the developer's heart will be touched by the school's plight, and hopes he will see his way clear to giving the high-rise to the nuns to become the new school. As the developer, played by everyone's favorite angel Henry Travers, has heart trouble, this proves their way in. He decides doing good is much less stressful than trying to continue in the cutthroat business world, and he gifts the high-rise to the nuns, only in Hollywood. As Sister Benedict is happily directing the movers, Crosby breaks the news to her that she has been reassigned. She also has been having health problems, and the doctor has ordered her to go take a rest cure in the West to get better. Now, initially, the doctor directs Crosby not to let her know the actual reason because they don't want her to worry. A very odd choice, seems to me. But at the last, Crosby does give in and tells her the truth. There are a few interesting side plots here involving the students. Sister Benedict has a background of playing sports in her more youthily youth, and when one of the boys proves himself unable to fight back when provoked, she at first dictates that he should turn the other cheek. It is the 1940s, however, and boys were directed to stand up for themselves because to do otherwise risked you being branded a sissy, which was social suicide. So she trains him in boxing. Other than the idea of being gentle being seen as weak, a definitely dated idea, the part is still quite cute and funny. My 11-year-old saw this scene and loved it. Another girl student, played by Joan Carroll, aka Agnes Smith in Meet Me in St. Louis, is taken in as a charity case as her mother cannot afford the tuition. The girl's father was a musician who never came back after an out-of-town gig, and her mother has turned to prostitution to support them both. It's interesting because this being in the Hays Code era, there was only so much they could allude to this, but still, there's never any doubt as to exactly what her mother does. And it translates to the girls having emotional difficulties in school because of her home situation. At the end, the family is reunited, the father being both contrite and forgiving of the mother, which is great to see, so it's happy endings all around. This is a worthy follow-up to the last film. Great to watch together or separate, but both of them equally good. Bergman's Sister Benedict could be cloying with just how good a person she is, but it's the sort of good you root for, and it never gets old. Recommended to watch in the same way as the first one. 1946, The Best Years of Our Lives. Directed by William Wyler. Starring Frederick March and Myrna Loy. 2 hours and 52 minutes. A drama about soldiers returning from World War II that actually doesn't hold back much from showing how difficult it was for them to reintegrate into society and deal with their traumatic experiences. They have nightmares and flashbacks. It's difficult for some of them to get work if they don't have experience in any field but war, and although some things have remained the same, much has changed, such as children who were young now being grown. March is the patriarch of a nuclear family. His older daughter can deal with him being home quite well, being older and remembering how things were decently well, but things with his younger son are a bit more awkward. In one scene, he sits his son down to give him a couple of gifts, i.e. spoils of war, that he brought back, revealing them to be a Japanese flag and a samurai sword. Now, both he and his son show how uncomfortable the situation makes them, particularly the son, who's just like, "Oh, those are nice, Dad," and then queries his dad about the effects of nuclear strikes. Dana Andrews is a younger newlywed who married his wife, Virginia Mayo, just before being shipped out, and when he returns, it doesn't take long for them both to realize they really don't know or even like each other that much. Our third soldier is Harold Russell, a non-actor who acts quite well, probably helped out by his real-world experience. Russell was really in the military and his hands were destroyed by a blast, and now he lives with hooks instead. He has learned how to use them and deals quite well, but it's yet another thing for his family and loved ones to deal with, and for him to try to deal with their trying to deal. Russell earned a special Oscar for his contribution to this film, and it is well earned, not just for his service or his sacrifice, but the fact that he's giving a solid, believable performance while simultaneously bringing attention to the problem of so many veterans. This film still hits today in so many ways, and it is a solidly emotional viewing experience. 1947, Forever Amber. Directed by Otto Preminger. Starring Linda Darnell, and Cornell Wilde. 2 hours and 18 minutes. So many darn long movies here! This and the book on which it was based were pretty popular. I'd never seen nor read it, but heard references to it in plenty of radio shows from the time. Amber of the title is a 17th century gal living in England whose family is Puritan, while she herself has far bigger dreams. When a group of king's soldiers stops at the tavern where she works, she sees a chance to escape her boring life and arranged marriage. She begins an affair with Wilde, who is one of the soldiers, until the king gives him orders to go to Bristol. Left behind, she determines to rise in station under her own abilities. She is soon swindled out of her money and lands in Newgate Prison. While there, she discovers that she is pregnant with Wilde's baby. A fellow convict falls for her, and together they escape. She has her baby at a brothel where they are hiding out. The convict, a highwayman, enlists her to lure rich men into dark alleyways, but he is soon killed by the guard. When she flees, she is discovered by a captain who likewise falls for her and takes her as mistress. She next becomes an actress in the theater, catching the eye of a wealthy earl. Although Wilde returns and meets his son, he also gets involved in a duel due to Darnell. Once he kills the other man, he leaves again, figuring he has done enough bad things for one lifetime. She marries the earl, but again goes to Wilde's side when he once more returns, but proves to have the plague. Darnell nurses him back to health, but then he finds out she is now married, and so he again leaves, for Virginia this time, to avoid temptation. Now the king himself has decided to take Darnell as his mistress, which her husband tries to stop by locking her in her room to die as the Great Fire of London threatens their manor. A servant rescues her by throwing the earl into the fire instead. She now goes to the king, Charles II, but upon learning she still loves Wilde, who again returns, this time with his own wife, Charles cuts her loose. Wilde offers to take their young son to America. Darnell gives the child the choice, thinking at least her son will be true to her, but the boy chooses Wilde, and she has to watch them leave her forever. Whew, that's a lot. It is a great, long, epic sober, but it is decently well told. Now, Darnell plays much the same role she did in the film Summer Storm, which coincidentally had George Sanders as her love interest. Here he plays Charles II. Of course, back in the day, you couldn't have a character do so many bad things and then give them a happy ending in movies. The novel doesn't give a happy ending either, but the ending is also ambiguous, with Amber sailing for America thinking her lover's wife to be dead. Even so, Amber is a layered heroine who is selfish and thoughtless, but also sympathetic given her limited options. She's simply using everything she has in order to try and expand her world. Perhaps it's for that reason that this was condemned by the Legion of Decency on its release. So if you watch this one, maybe avert your eyes. 1948, Easter Parade. Directed by Charles Walters. Starring Fred Astaire and Judy Garland. 1 hour and 48 minutes. At least this one isn't super long. I also did not have to watch it. I've been watching this one continually since I was a kid, and now it's required viewing every Easter. This is a thoroughly delightful musical set in 1912 with Astaire and the insanely talented Ann Miller as a dance team who are also an item off stage. It all ends when Miller decides to break up the act and go out on her own. In a fit of despondency, Astaire picks out the first dancing girl he happens to bump into, Garland, who works at a small-time bar. There is much hilarity as Astaire attempts to mold Garland into a ballroom dancer, eventually realizing that they must play to her particular strengths if they are to make their own act a success. Yes, again, there is a noticeable age difference. Garland was 26 and Astaire was 49, but at least nobody's underage. A low bar, but apparently it exists. Anyway, there's a terrific supporting cast with Peter Lawford and Jules Munchin, and amazing song and dance numbers. Astaire always was willing to challenge himself technically, and the Stepping Out With My Baby number, among many others, still hits. And speaking of technical superiority, I must again mention Ann Miller. And this dress. This dress! So, go watch this movie. It is a hoot and a treat. Last one, 1949. Samson and Delilah. Directed by Cecil B. DeMille. starring Victor Mature and Hedy Lamarr. 2 hours and 14 minutes because of course it was. It's a biblical epic. Samson is Hebrew, but decides to marry the Philistine woman Semidar, Angela Lansbury, proving himself worthy by killing a lion and besting the local lord's champion with both his bare hands and the encouragement of her younger sister Delilah, played by Lamarr. At the wedding feast, Samson puts forth a riddle as a challenge. If any can answer, he will give all the men present at the feast fine cloaks of their choosing. Semidar tricks him into giving her the answer, which he then passes along. Samson gets the cloaks, but returns to find Semidar's father has used the time to marry her off to someone else. Samson is rightfully pissed and starts a fight, resulting in the deaths of several of the family, including Semidar. Now Delilah, who was in love with him this whole time and didn't make that a secret, now swears revenge on him due to the death of pretty much her entire family. Samson gives himself the job of Philistine caravan raider, which makes the local lord decide to tax the Hebrews into giving him up, which they do. Taken as a slave, Samson prays for strength, rips his bonds, and kills a bunch more soldiers. Delilah comes up with the idea to seduce him in order to learn the secret of his strength. Of course, it's his hair, as most Bible readers will know. She cuts off the hair and he is retaken by the Philistines and made a slave. Delilah goes to see him, intending to torture him further, but she takes it all back when she finds him blind. He is taken to a large temple to endure public torture and humiliation. Delilah, knowing his strength may return, convinces the Lord to tie Samson between two pillars. With the help of heaven, Samson pulls down the pillars and the entire temple, killing them all in the process. It is a long story, and it's not too bad, but it really helps if you're a fan of Mature, which I personally am not. As for Lamarr, she was many things, including, if you've been living under a rock and haven't been on the internet in the past 10 years, the co-inventor of Bluetooth, but this part is just more of her being cast as a temptress of some such. This happened so much she quite rightfully got sick of it and looked to learning more about technology and inventing, a love for which had been instilled in her by her father, for something of interest. Honestly, if you're looking for a tale of drama and intrigue, I'd read a biography of her life instead of watch this film. But if you're maybe doing a rotation of biblical epics, this is a generally decent enough addition to the list. Whew, okay, we got there in the end with the absolutely, definitely, completely accurate list of the top box office 1940s movies in America. That's a lot of information right there. So, as always, have you seen any of these movies? What did you think of them? Did any of them sound intriguing? Put it all in the comments. And we have another week ahead. It's gonna be a heck of a one, I'm sure. That's just how it is nowadays. So hang in there, everyone. I am pulling for you. Take care of yourselves and each other. And I'll see you next time. Bye now.